I want to lift up the idea of shame this morning, and in particular, white shame. I was with a gathering of some friends and community members on Zoom this week, just checking in about how we're all holding this moment. And one person shared that this was a white person shared that as she was watching the video of the murder of George Floyd, she was not only in the excruciating pain of watching a man's life being taken from him before her very eyes, but she also felt this awful, aching truth that that officer did what he did, she said, for me. He was doing that for me. And she said, I am so ashamed. I want to talk about shame this morning because what she said resonated so much with me. I felt it too. I shared with many of you about 6 months or so ago that I felt something similar, that aching sense of shame after I watched Ava DuVernay's incredible work on the Central Park Five, the Exonerated Five, in which she displays for us in this act of truth-telling and reckoning that's so essential for our country to be on a path toward justice and healing the brutality of the reality of what happened in 1989. She tells the story about the 5 Black and brown children, 14, 15 years old, who were arrested, who were prosecuted, and who were forced to spend years in prison for a crime that they had absolutely nothing to do about. She shows the zeal of the prosecutors in making these arrests and putting these boys away, turning their entire lives upside down and stealing their childhood. And as I was watching the film with David, I kept thinking both I was horrified by the cruelty of it, but also I was ashamed because I understood that those prosecutors and officers were doing it for me. They were doing it for me. I was 15 years old, a white Jewish kid living in the suburbs, but they were doing what they were doing so that I, at 17, would feel safe and comfortable going to college in New York City. They were sending a message out to the world that New York City was safe for kids like me, for kids who came from the suburbs and were dressed in the skin that I'm dressed in. And so I not only felt so moved by the artistry of what Ava DuVernay brings forward, I not only felt so grateful that our country was beginning to be engaged in this national reckoning, but also ashamed that I was complicit in the criminality of what was being revealed on the screen. And what we're experiencing right now, I think, is evoking in a lot of white people that sense of shame, this gnawing, aching sense that this brutality, that the excessive force that we're seeing from police officers here at home, from the LAPD and across the country, is rooted in hundreds of years of racist ideology, which has been translated into racist policy, which is rooted in entrenched predatory self-interest. All of that is actually being done for people in white bodies to feel safe, because we live in a country that's rooted in a narrative that Black bodies are a threat, that Black bodies are criminal, and white bodies need to be protected from them. And I know that it's making a lot of us just feel ashamed. And that realization is absolutely, utterly paralyzing. I saw a tweet yesterday as I was scrambling through my day. I saw a tweet that stopped me in my tracks, which was written by a man named Dr. Darian Sutton, who I don't know, but he's a Black doctor, and here's what he wrote. He said, I have to mentally prepare myself to drive to my ER shift after curfew. My friends say, but you're an ER doctor. They'll know, as if anyone cared about Breonna Taylor and her essential status. He said, I've managed to get through this entire pandemic without contracting COVID-19, and I have never experienced this much fear until I realized that I have to drive to work now after curfew. So he goes on to describe his plans. I won't wear a mask as I make my way to my car because I want to appear less threatening. I'll pin my hospital ID to my left shoulder while I'm driving. This will allow anyone who pulls me over to see my title first, and then hopefully I can use that privilege to leverage my life. This ought to make us feel shame. This doctor, who for the last 3 months has put his life on his line, endangered himself in order to save lives, is now more scared than he's ever been before, not of COVID-19, but of what my friend Reverend Otis Moss III calls COVID-16-19. That's what he's afraid of right now. So I, like Najuma, I look to the text. I look to these ancient texts and try to see what kind of wisdom might come. And this week we confront the story of the Sota in this week's Torah portion in the book of Numbers. This story always hurts my heart because it shows me and shows all of us how deeply flawed our systems are and how much violence has been done in the name of religion and in the name of the sacred over the course of thousands of years, in this case against women in our sacred tradition. But here it is, a woman whose husband becomes jealous of her. And then he perceives that she's committed adultery, and the spirit of jealousy absolutely consumes him. It's actually called the law of the jealous one. He takes his wife and he brings her before the Kohen, before the priest, with an offering, and the Kohen takes this sacred water, which is mixed with dirt from the floor of our holiest place, put inside sacred words of God's name, and then tears off her headscarf and humiliates her and makes her drink this sacred water, which is magically going to determine if she's innocent or if she's guilty of committing adultery. If she's guilty, she's going to die a grotesque public death. If she's innocent, she gets to go home with her husband, who's just publicly humiliated her, and they get to have a baby. So everyone lives happily ever after. This is some shame-rooted biblical justice. The story of the jealous husband, a woman who's accused of engaging in shameful behavior, who then gets publicly shamed, as if that's somehow going to lift the shame of her jealous husband, who either ends up alienated forever from his wife or grieving forever for his wife, who he has essentially killed. This system is compelled by and contained by a shame paralysis. And either way, your shame is the end of you. Either you live in a punishing society that shames you and treats you like a disgrace, or you shame yourself and you believe I am a disgrace. And either way, you can't move because shame is absolutely paralyzing. I think a lot about what Father Greg Boyle teaches us about shame. He says that the principal suffering throughout history is shame and disgrace, that shame is the heart of addiction, that shame is the heart of behaviors that harm other people. So what do we have to do? He says you have to reach in and dismantle the messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way and keep people from seeing the truth. The measure of health in any community, says Father Greg Boyle, may well stand in our ability to hold awe at what he says the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment of how they carry it. And I translate that right now in this moment in time, not only instead of him talking specifically about the poor, to what the Black community is holding in this moment. And instead of holding shame about our relationship to it, stand in awe of the incredible dignity with which people carry the burden that our country has placed on their shoulders. He tells an incredible story about shame, about one woman named Lisa, a heroin addict and a prostitute and gang member, who one day came into his office when he had just sat down at his desk and only had a few minutes to get through his work before he was going to have to go back out and officiate a wedding or a quinceañera or baby naming or something. And Lisa comes in and she starts to tell her story. She grew up Catholic, even went to Catholic school. And she tells him that for the first time she did heroin the day of her high school graduation. And then she pauses in silence and she says to him, I am a disgrace. And he says, that was the moment where her shame met mine, because until that moment, I had mistaken her for an interruption in my day. And in that moment was able to see her as a person with a broken heart. Our shame can stop us in our tracks, especially today. In this moment of collective awakening, when the veil is pulled back and we are seeing now things that we could not see 12 days ago, that now are achingly clear to us. One person said to me this week, I remember Eric Garner's murder like it was yesterday. I even went to a couple protests. How am I supposed to explain to my kids now why I didn't do more over the last 6 years so that this would not have happened again? Shame. The shame could paralyze us, or it could change us. It could mobilize us. It could transform us. And I think the question that I want to add to Reverend Najuma's list of questions for us today is, what are we going to do with our shame? Because today, Breonna Taylor would have turned 20. Yesterday, Breonna Taylor would have turned 27 years old. Instead, 2 months ago, the police in Louisville, Kentucky burst into her home in the middle of the night and they shot her to death. And we all know by now that the person that they were looking for was actually living miles away and was already in police custody, but that did not stop them from issuing a no-knock warrant on her home and coming in shooting. Breonna was a first responder. She came from a big family. She loved to play games. She took naps before each of her shifts for the EMT. She loved singing and she loved cooking, and she should still be alive today. So what are we going to do to transform our shame, to make sure that there's not another Breonna Taylor, another George Floyd, another Ahmaud Arbery, another and another and another, with us again looking back, those who embody white skinned bodies, saying, God, I'm so ashamed I didn't do more once again. My friend Ruth Messenger says we don't have the luxury of despair. And I know today that we don't have the luxury of shame, because there's no time for the paralysis that comes from shame and systems of shame. So this is a plea to us. This is a plea that we move from shame to responsibility. If you've never been involved to this point, I don't want to hear about how ashamed you are that you didn't take to the streets before. I want you to take to the streets now. If you've been in this fight for years, I want you to catch your breath and then go back out. We, all of us, need to do more. As I was walking to one of the protests this week in downtown LA, I ended up walking beside two young Black women. We were clearly all going to the same place, holding our signs in our hands. And the two women turned to me and they said, "Thank you for showing up." And it felt like a knife in my throat. Thank me? It's literally the least I can do. Literally, the least I can do right now is show up. Because my liberation is tied to your liberation. And if I really believe that, and if we really believe that, then we would know that we are called to fight and to stand and to lift and to love and to amplify and to announce and to pronounce and to stand with everything we've got, not only today, but every single day, to declare that we will stand side by side with our brothers and sisters of color, with all of our siblings in this country, and to fight with love until this nightmare is over and until we have together birthed a true multiracial, multi-faith democracy in which the image of God is affirmed in every single one of us every single day. We can't get there if at the forefront of our self-understanding right now is a profound sense of shame. And so I invite us to be honest about where we sit, but transform the shame into a sense of responsibility that is linked to a true feeling of love and a shared struggle for liberation, so that we all might come together to a better way and to a better day. Shabbat Shalom.